G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day and so far a fantastic weekend. Now I know the Australian time zone is different to the majority of the world, so when I say that, if I mean it in the future or past for you, well, I still mean it. But today we do have a lot to go over. Of course, we're going to look at the maps in the north, the east and the south and have a look at where things are shifting, and then we'll apply some geolocations to this as well. I want to talk about oil and US companies still operating within Russia, large recruitment there, and where the sanctions actually then lie. Of course, we're going to look at the north in depth, where Ukraine has taken down some bridges. We'll look at the geolocations of that and what the future plans might be. I want to talk at length about false flag attacks as well, as I do think coming into where the later stages of this war may be, or into the next months or years, we don't know how long, a false flag event is becoming more likely as if someone grows more desperate. But where we're going to start is there has been a lot of strikes overnight. Now there's been a lot of contention around, are these decoys? What is the damage? And again, unless you're on the ground looking at this or a contractor who works on these systems, very, very hard to get an idea. But we will talk about this. We'll talk about the systems as well. Now, where I want to start with this, and we have seen it has been a rough day for Ukraine with these strikes. Let's start with the one that is the most obvious and confirmed then by both sides then here. So Yuri Inhart, who we've spoken about a little bit, has confirmed a loss of a MiG-29 fighter. Lost MiG-29. Luckily, everyone is alive. Then we will have a look at then the footage of this, and then I'll show you a geolocation, but just in a second as it lines up with something else. So we can see this was originally reported as a Su-25, I believe, but this later on has been confirmed as a MiG-29 due to the two vertical stabilizers. But what we can see here is then there are two trucks said to be refueling trucks then next to this aircraft as then the strike takes place, and then you can see a number of secondaries beyond then this as well, what could be then the avgas then exploding. So again, were there casualties here? We don't know, but it does look like there were personnel then around the aircraft, at least then just prior to it, and there is one aircraft definitely then taken out there as well. Now, a lot of these strikes are done with Iskander ballistic missiles from Russia. Now, one thing I've spoken about over the last 6 or more months is Russia seems to have improved its kill chain a lot between seeing something with a drone and then having a missile land on that. Now, yes, some of this is decoys, whatever, but the point I'm making is even if it's seeing the decoy to missile on it, that kill chain has seemed to improve dramatically to the point where we have spoken about, could there be a modification made to the Iskander of maybe a laser designation, so that drone is painting a target with a laser and then it is hitting, and that would speed up that process, as well as then just administrative things to actually speed up the process of time on target of weapon systems. Now, if you want to see me speak to a PhD speaking about if there could be modifications to weapons like this and how sanctions will or will not hit on high-tech weapons like this, I'll link a podcast then down below. But we do have a number of other losses to look at here, and we did see the loss of a HIMARS system yesterday. But still on that with the Iskander, this gentleman here, Tobias, made a good point. Bjorgenfall, I'm guessing that's like Icelandic or something, but he made a good point here. The Iskander 9 November 922 Kilo 5 missile released 54 submunitions. They explode 316 tungsten shrapnels, cover an area of about 20,000 square meters, if I remember correctly. They release about 18,000 fragmentations. These systems are gone irrelevant if something doesn't explode or not. They are littered with holes. So if I throw something tungsten at you, it's going to bloody hurt it. Things are very, like radars, they're not heavily armored. So things will still be littered with holes in here. About decoys, this is close to Russia. They're easy to detect and confirmed as decoys or not. The electronic emission they send out are huge, too easy to pick up the EW systems. So this is the thing, if a radar is on, it should be very easy to find with things like HARM, like anti-radiation missiles or detectors for that, but they're not on all the time. So that's where it could be confused if a decoy or not. You see it, well, where it's not emitting, but are we not going to hit that? But again, good points on the fragmentations, and that will become like when we see then some of these strikes. So this one here, this is a Patriot battery here. So you can see launches, but you can also see there is a radar then near the tree line here. Tree line, you can see 2 launches of Pack 3 and then an airburst Iskander over the top of this area. Now again, one of the things which is being shown here is you can see how deep in that these then drones are working, that has had an increased ISR at depth. Now you can see that this has then exploded over here. Now, one thing we can't see here is then any of the classic secondaries that we see. So we don't know the damage here, but why I bring up that message before this is there's probably a hell of a lot of damage to that radar system from tungsten balls going through it, as well as anyone who's out of a vehicle at the time. Again, the penetration of shrapnel fragmentation is a massive, it has a massive degree of how much that can penetrate things like armor and cover as well. It's not as simple as what a rifle may do due to just how it is then dispersed. So definitely at least some damage caused to that Patriot battery. Now, the reason I bring this one up first is, well, I've deleted it now, but where this Patriot battery is then geolocated is down this tree line here, where we then saw the destruction of the MiG-29 was then at this airfield here. This is sitting near Dnipro. Now, this could be then is, say, 65 Ks as the crow flies. We can zoom out and see the direction of this. This could be part of the layered air defense then for this airfield as well. So it could have hit that, depending on the damage, but at least even if there's no damage, just say there's likely a lot of damage, that system would pack up and move for if there is a secondary strike. So that maybe that's why there was then success on this airfield, but that's just me pulling 2 and 2 together. Now, we have seen at least 1 more HIMARS destroyed. Yesterday, we got the most clear footage of a HIMARS being destroyed that we have got so far through this war. And then today, there are claims that 2 more have been destroyed. I think it's confirmed that 1, but some of these videos, of course, these were released by the Russian MOD. Like I always say, there's said to be 1 and then the second one up here. Like I say, with anything from MODs, you can see why there would be incentive to lie and embellish what's hit. So you can see a cook-off here, so something's definitely been hit. We do see a secondary strike. And then, but there's at least 1 definitely confirmed in here from footage then afterwards. So 2 strikes there, so they're saying 2, but then we actually get a battle damage assessment in here too, and this is something I wish we would get more often, is to confirm things is aftermath of strikes. So you can see pretty clearly in here that there has been then a HIMARS truck destroyed, something else destroyed here, maybe something down in here also. Again, I'm happy to say 1 on the second. I don't know. I don't think there's enough. So there's definitely some damage and destroyed trucks in here. We saw that cook off. Again, at least 1. 2 in 2 days, as well as a HIMARS system damaged or to a degree destroyed. We don't see the cook-offs of the one before. They are still very large losses, regardless if these other ones are decoys or not from here. Now, this one here, I think, is most likely a decoy. This is said to be an IRST system sitting then here. Then we see then an Iskander strike over the top here. But then we don't see any of the typical cook-off or anything here. We can still see it there, not on fire. So I think likely a decoy there. Again, unless you're on the ground, it's very difficult to say yes or no to something. This one potentially decoys as well. This is another Patriot system here with then multiple launches. And you can see the Iskander over the top. This is said to be in the Sumy region. Of course, Sumy, I'll show you, Sumy, Kursk, this is where Ukraine is having most amount of their initiative pouring in elements at the moment. So where would you expect things like this? I should say those HIMARS are also in Sumy. So launches, but we don't see any really obvious cook-off. But what we do see is right here, we do see something. Now, what I should say is anything with submunitions, there's a hell of a lot of unexploded ordnance with any submunitions. This is why I don't like the use of submunitions anywhere, is 50 years after the war, some kid picks one up or treads on one and blows them up, as well as has a huge effect on agriculture with tractors and cows and bloody everything. I know a farmer in Kyiv who lost like 50% of his livestock just due to mines and submunitions also. So again, that's not completely obvious to me. Some people have brought up, if these are decoys, why would you have all three right next to each other of all the same launcher? But again, out in the open, not sure. I'm not willing to say if this is a system or not. I think likely could be then a decoy. Let's get rid of the RST. Now this one is said to be a Su-34, has struck an S-125 anti-aircraft missile system in Sumy as well. So you can see strike here. Now, is this cook-off bits we can see as far as some of the then white sort of streaking out? Again, not sure. It's so hard to know with any of this if it is or isn't, but I'll show you them. You can make up your own mind and feel free to absolutely to disagree with me. But the majority of these are in Sumy. And like I will say, we know at least one Patriot has been damaged, at least 2 HIMARS in the last couple of days. They're still big losses, even if we don't consider the ones that are potential 50-50 on if it is a decoy or not. We've also seen Ukraine has struck a Panzer, a Russian air defense system too, said to be down in Crimea, but I couldn't find a really good geolocation on this. Now this is sped up, showing how much then these are tracking it. What we can see is we're seeing a lot of deeper ISR capabilities by Russia and Ukraine, and then a double strike then here, and you can see that clear destruction of an air defense system there too, that sort of firework display that you typically get. So especially if it has munitions still on board, that's something which we need to take into account for some systems too, is if it's fired at salvo, you may not get that typical solid rocket fuel booster thing that we then see. Now I want to talk about false flags before we then have a look at the north and the bridges that's been taken down and what that may indicate to future actions by the Ukrainian forces and where the Russians may sit here too. So Ministry of Foreign Affairs Ukraine has put this out then today. That the Ministry of Foreign Affairs refutes the message of Russian propaganda that Ukraine's alleged plans to use dirty bombs or attack a nuclear power plant. We are witnessing another surge of crazy Russian propaganda about Ukraine's alleged plans to use dirty bombs or attack nuclear power plants. We officially deny these false reports. Ukraine has neither the intention nor the ability to carry out such actions. Russia must stop spreading dangerous lies. Now, if you want to watch a podcast, I should be writing this down, but I'm linking. If you want to see a podcast about dirty bombs and people that I know who have worked in areas where we've seen some rudimentary bombs made before, I'll link both podcasts down below. Let me write this down. I'll put that down below too. We officially deny these false reports. Blah blah blah. Oh, sorry. Ukraine has always been and remains a loyal member of the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty. We do not have any dirty bombs and do not plan to acquire them. When Russia first spread this nonsense in 2022, we invited the IAEA mission that completely refuted the lie. Nothing has changed since then, said the spokesman of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. You look on the IAEA back in 2022, they said they found no evidence that anything was being made. Of course, they're at the ZAP nuclear power plant too, where there's been a lot of claims of strikes one way, claims of strikes the other. Now, what I want to look at is why and when would you carry out a false flag event? I'll display this to you and you can see why I think that the odds of having some level of false flag wherever this war then goes, but into the future, is highly likely. Like we have seen with Nord Stream, like we have seen Novokhovka. Again, it's not 100% sure who did them, but you can see then why these are carried out and what it can have a effect on then the other side of the war. Countries at war may carry out false flag attacks for several reasons, all of which typically involve manipulating public perception or gaining a strategic advantage. Justification for war or escalation. So could there be a false flag carried out to then have Russia escalate the war? Could they then do that? Or could there be a false flag carried out to then have an escalation the other side and maybe then have NATO move in? Demonising the enemy. False flag attacks can be used to portray the enemy as aggressive, dangerous, or inhumane. Diverting attention. False flag attack may be used to divert attention from other issues such as internal problems, military failures, or unpopular policies. Provoking a response. A false flag attack might be intended to provoke a response from the enemy. So you do something, provoke, then a larger response. And people have spoken about this. Could that be some of the Kursk? Of course, not then a false flag, but a movement into here. If it's looking like it's going somewhere, you provoke an overreaction response. Therefore, you may bring in more military donations or military action too. Undermining confidence in the enemy. By framing the enemy for a false attack, a country can undermine the enemy's credibility and sow discord among its allies. So if, say, Russia carried a false flag attack, undermines Ukraine, Ukraine's allies may then step away, vice versa. Creating confusion and misinformation. In the chaos of war, misinformation can be a powerful tool. False flag can create confusion about the true state of the conflict, making it harder for the enemy to respond effectively for neutral parties to understand the situation. These attacks are typically covert operations, as their effectiveness depends on the success of the deception. If exposed, false flag operations can severely damage the credibility of that country carried out. So you're damaging credibilities, or then having a justification, or then having retaliations, or then potentially escalations. Now, when could you see false flag attacks? As a pretext for war, so before the war, or a pretext for wider war. Also, rallying domestic support during periods of low public morale or opposition to the war. If many people are opposing a war, you do something and then it gives a population a reason to get then behind the war. If look at what they have done. To provoke an enemy reaction when seeking to escalate conflict or force the enemy into making a strategic mistake. So get more support, and this goes into point number 4, which is then gaining international support, trying to secure alliances or military aid to persuade other nations to support or join the conflict by making the enemy appear more dangerous or aggressive than they are. Discrediting internal opposition in situations where there's significant internal dissent or opposition to the government and its policies to justify crackdowns on political opponents, dissidents, or ethnic religious minorities. So then the opposition, to discredit them away, say that's got then nothing. It's part of the propaganda war as well. Diversion from internal problems. During times of economic crisis, political scandal, or civil unrest, divert attention from internal issues by creating an external threat. A false flag attack can shift the focus of the population and the media away from domestic problems and onto unifying crisis, getting everyone behind something. Sowing discord amongst allies when seeking to weaken alliances or create divisions among the enemy's allies. So if you can paint Ukraine however through an attack, and then allies may not then work with them, but of course on the other side you discredit Russia, make it look as an external threat, and it may have allies then come in as well. So you can see why there could be in the future, I'm saying there is realistic chances that I'm seeing, and I think most likely, because somewhere it's going to go more and more desperate, that I think a false flag attack somewhere could be on the horizon, and this does concern me. Now, number 8, final point here. Peace negotiation tactics. Timing. When preparing for or during peace negotiations. The purpose? To strengthen one's bargaining position by creating a situation that pressures the enemy to make concessions. A false flag attack might be used to demonstrate the enemy's perceived aggressiveness or to create a sense of urgency for peace talks. So laying that out, that's why it concerns me about what I see as a realistic threat of this into then the future, to rally support both domestically and internationally, to have maybe overreactions or to justify actions too. So let's have a look in the north, and we'll use then a couple of maps here, and I want to show you some footage as well. But here's Ukraine in the center, the capital of Kyiv. The red areas occupied since 2022, the purple since 2014, the blue territory Ukraine has got back within the last 2 weeks. The green is the same, but then over that 2 weeks. Now on this map, we do see then a shift just here out to the east by Ukraine, but as we know, this map isn't tracking maybe the best. So let's jump onto then the Noel Reports map, and he does show on the 16th here a movement out to the east, of course, out into where we have seen presence previously. Now let's then look at the Syriac map here as well, showing more movement out Can I move this across so you can actually see it? Sorry. More movement out to the east as well in other directions. Maybe Russia took back some ground, but there's still a lot of pressure and this has not stabilized yet. Russian army recaptured the locality of here. This, on the other hand, the grey zone was expanded further north following new Ukrainian incursions there. Clashes between both sides continue along the entire front. So definitely has not stabilized yet. Ukraine is making still more ground. Russia's having some counterattacks, but it'll probably be a while to see what the goal overall is here. But we have seen, this isn't the footage I want, this is the footage I want. This bridge has then been taken down with munitions. These are holes punched in the bridge. Then we can see, bang, massive hit on this bridge here, and then the bridge is down. So we have a previous image of this bridge. You can see these holes banged in here. Again, bridges, you can just end up punching holes through things. Bridges are actually very, very difficult to bring down. They're not meant to come down, and the way they're built is specifically for this. And you can see this is a photograph too of this bridge coming down. Now this is in Russian controlled territory at this time. We'll look at exactly where these two bridges are. This is the bridge we see the photographs of, said to be this bridge down also. Now this isn't making sense at the moment, but it's about to. So this bridge is in Glashkovo, which is right then here on this map or up here on this map. We'll use this map for the sake of it. So this is the Glashkovo bridge here, then across this waterway. Now, if we have a look at the main road networks through here, this is really the main route into this area for the Russian forces to then bring equipment across. I can't draw on this map, but this one's down, so it could limit the logistical supply for then Russia in here. In turn, what it can do is create a natural border barrier. Russia may have to pull out of here and Ukraine may seek to occupy. So this is the border. This is the border between Thankyou. This is the Russia-Ukraine border here. This is where my cursor is where this waterway is. That Russia may have to have the withdrawal out of here, or they can't supply logistics and Ukraine could end up occupying then this whole region down in here as well. So this is an interesting bit. Now there are other bridges across here. We can zoom in and have a look, and it is, so one's like down in here. So you can go up and down and find bridges here, but of course one of the main routes and other bridges of course are susceptible to things that go bang. So we may see this, but on the flip side of this, you then have another issue is if, okay, you've taken down these bridges, Russia withdraw, and then you push into here, then the bridge is gone for you to move across then the other way too. So that does create another issue, but if you want to have the maximum square kilometers, yes, this is the exact issue we saw, of course, down in Kherson. And I've stated multiple times, I think the largest failure the Russians have actually had is the withdrawal, the forced withdrawal by an offensive out of Kherson, because all the bridges are cut through here. To actually have any success across here, incredibly difficult, incredibly costly, just to try and get forces across, then a pontoon, and then to have an expanded bridgehead. Insanely difficult, and of course difficult the other way. Of course, we saw down in here in Krinky, Ukraine held that bridgehead for a while at a large cost, and then that has come back now. To any movement across here is going to be insanely difficult in a war with drones, both ISR and lethal as well, and how quickly that can set. It is said Russia's putting in pontoons, but we will see. We may see a withdrawal out of here. Now, I want to clear up something that I said yesterday, I think was misinterpreted. When I have said Russia may forego territory in here, what I don't mean is I don't mean the border will be redrawn here permanently. It's similar to what I said about then the Kharkiv push by the Russians into Ukraine as well. Now, what I was saying here is you then temporarily pull back to more defensive lines. You have you let them occupy that area. They have to extend their front line. They have to push in a lot of equipment, and then you push somewhere else. Because if defending then new offensives or launching offensives to then push out threatens on your other missions or other offensive in other areas, you may actually be better off taking a step back and thinking we'll regain that in the future and or in negotiations. So this is what I said down here with, is it worth a massive counterattack into Volchansk, in Lipsy, in these fronts, or really good defensive works and then keep focusing on other areas at the time, forcing particularly maybe an overextension. And I'll say the same thing then here. This is, let's say 1,000 square kilometers. Let's say in all of this if all of this was here, say 2,500 square Ks, is it worth for the Russians maybe building defensive lines in here, like we've seen them building, saying, okay, you're going to have to now man a couple of 100-kilometre new front line, and the areas in here will be at our defensive lines. You have to be in here, and we'll just continue down in here. This is one of the things that optics can take away from tactics. If you're really concerned about optics, which typically the Soviets, Russians, Ukrainians have been very concerned with how something looks and then how that affects strategy and tactics at the other end. But if you're obsessed with the optics of how this looks, it may take away from the best strategic decision here, which may be dig in defensive lines, don't let it expand too much, but make the opposing side pour in elements. And I said the exact same thing down in Kharkiv here. Now, next we want to step onto, and that is the update for the north, is what is then occurring in the east. We do see a couple of changes on this map. So let's start in Avdiivka, where we have seen Russia has been expanding control over the last days, over the last weeks, over the last months toward Pokrovsk. And now what I've said about that optics thing is, could you not jeopardize your, say Russia, could they jeopardize their offensive here by pushing on the defensive in Kursk, which I believe was probably the mission, to probably try and get Russian forces rerouted. But if you push on this, you may then force Ukraine to reroute soldiers here to bolster their defense. It's strategy, tactics, optics, it's a hard thing for anyone to make sense of, but we can see a push down into Mykolaiivka as well, out into Horodka as well, of course, expanding control further and further towards the center hub here, being Pokrovsk and Minograd. So let's then bring up the Suryak map right in here, bring this across. This is Zeleny in here, so it's saying more under control, and that Mykolaiivka is then under control, and a further push by Russian forces as well near Horodka, as Ukraine then bolsters some defensive positions. So these maps are showing fairly similar here. Russian army continued advancing along this axis of Horodka, taking control of a series of positions north, south, east, and inside the locality. In addition, Russian forces advanced towards the locality of here and captured new trench systems at the western shore of the Volcha River. So down in this direction, I think we may potentially see this area then have a withdrawal at some point, looking by the grey zone here, and how Russia is pushing down to the south, expanding and fattening this offensive action that they've got here. Let's come up just to the northeast of here, and we're in the Toretsk, New York front. Now, you can see some pages saying that New York is completely under Russian control by the grey zone here, showing similar to that, but it's not confirmed yet by multiple of what is completely under control, but we can see a Russian advancement out from Pivnevchi as well here. Bring up the Suryak map. Now, shows advancement in similar locality to here, starting the break-in into Toretsk itself, but more of a push out, just out from Zalezhne as well. We can see where these reservoirs are sitting here, so we may see a close-up of the territory here too. During the last 4 days, Russian army took control over this mine and adjacent Terrakon west of Pevnetsky, so up in here and across the base, across where my cursor is. The town is now under Russian control. In addition, Russian forces advanced southwest of Zalezhne and entered the part of the electrical substation. So right down in right here. So interesting to see these movements and how this will then affect up in here. Could we see a Russian withdrawal out of here to try and bolster and stabilize this front, or could we see Ukraine withdraw and try and stabilize this front here? We don't know exactly how the makeup of these elements on the ground then actually looks. Now, one more thing while I have you here, we need to talk about oil. And Financial Times then reported this. US Oil Services Group, SLB, expands in Russia as competitors withdraw. Following the exit of its main Western allies since Moscow's full-scale invasion, the world's biggest oil field companies is expanding. Houston-based company, formerly known as Schlumberger, has signed a new contracts and recruited hundreds of staff in the country after its two largest US rivals, Baker Hughes and Halliburton, both sold their Russian businesses to local managers. Can't read. What I will say here is they probably picked it up for a bargain. If in the beginning of 2022 and the war was going on and the pressure on these countries to pull out, I'm guessing this got sold to local managers for very cheap and probably bought cheap again. That individuals and companies may care about war and how things look, but the stock market price return to investors, that isn't long-term a massive concern of how it may look. That is one thing that I'll say. I believe that a lot of, say, military companies, oil companies, they'd sell weapons to the other side if they were allowed to, and actually many times have. I'm not saying this war, but I'm meaning in the history of it. Documents obtained by non-profit group Global Witness, seen by the FT by Financial Times, show that in December, SLB's Russian business signed a contract with the Russian Oil and Gas Institute, Vigny. The Financial Times identified more than 1,000 jobs advertised, posted by the company since December, seeking roles that range from drivers to chemists to geologists. So supplying equipment in there. And overall, I will say this is in the tens of millions of dollars, but low tens of millions. When we're talking oil and massive business, you'd be talking in the billions. So the exact amount of influence here, I'm still not 100% sure on, and it doesn't lay it out in this article of how much it is. SLB is upfront that has no plans to leave Russia. In July 23, the company said it was halting shipments of products and technology into Russia from all SLB's facilities worldwide in response to continued expansion of international sanctions. But I'm guessing picking up a lot of this as its competitors have pulled out, probably picking it up for very cheap. 22-23, it provided Lukoil with drilling tools and hydraulic packers. Lukoil, this is the company I've spoken about recently. Of course, a lot of those products crossing across Ukraine into Hungary, Slovakia, areas like this. And there's been a lot of discussion about Hungary, Slovakia, like, we want this. Ukraine wanting to then turn off the taps on that for the money, of course, that is going back into Russia. Human rights groups and the Ukrainian government allege SLB's work in the country helps generate billions of dollars of oil revenues to support Kremlin's war effort. Last year, Ukraine's National Agency on Corruption Prevention added SLB to an international sponsor of war blacklist. So that they're saying, due to doing any business in Russia, you're funding then Russia, you're funding the Kremlin, therefore they can buy weapons or maintain the war and that money there. We see it very similar with Israel, and you may even see something like, McDonald's if they didn't pull out on something like this. You see a lot of people like that, especially at the moment all over social media, because of course a lot of countries have pulled out, so it's not a trending thing, but you see that of course now with Israel and people pushing on, say, McDonald's or Adidas or whatever to have a pull out. We even saw Tinder and P-Hub pull out of Russia too. Of course, very different scales, but just to give an example. I thought for a war effort, being a soldier myself, I thought if P-Hub, Tinder pulled out of a country, that the war would collapse. That was the largest sanction I've seen. I'm telling you, if there's ever a war with the Australian or American army or the UK, if the opposing side, if they can pull off Tinder, cigarettes, P-Hub, Zins, the war's done. Anyway. But Western policymakers have avoided imposing comprehensive sanctions on oilfield services in Russia over concerns it would choke off fossil fuel exports and cause a spike in global oil prices. Exactly why we've seen the Pentagon, the US, the White House may not be happy about Ukraine striking a lot of Russian oil facilities. In May, the US Department of State Service said SLB had thus far not breached sanctions, and the company had a clear understanding for where the guardrails were. So towing that line, but then it seems right to the line. So I guess we'll see into the future, and I think the longer this goes on, we may see more and more creep back into those markets, or companies like this then picking up other pieces and larger shares of markets as well. Legends, have a fantastic day, and I'll speak tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.